Braylon, let me bring him in. You get the first question, and I'm sure it's about the guy we were just talking about. Tom Pelissero, NFL Network, kind enough to join us here for a couple of minutes on Woodward Sports. Tom, thanks so much for the time. We certainly appreciate it here in Detroit.
You got it, guys. What's going on?
Hey, Tom Pelissero here. Braylon Edwards, man, I watch you every morning and get up. I tell you, I watch you. I love your takes. You stand your ground. You go after it. And you know what? After everything you say, I'm always left feeling, I think Tom might be right. So, Tom, we appreciate that, man. I want to get right back into it. It's where I started with Baker Mayfield and the Cleveland Browns and the Baker Mayfield experience. Is it almost time to reassess? Because I know half the fans in Cleveland are one way and half the other. But guess what? I know those Cleveland fans. They're ready to get people out of there as fast as they come. Is it almost time to go on with the experiment and move forward?
Well, first off, Braylon, I appreciate you watching and listening to me. I also appreciate the fantasy football title you helped me win circa like 2007 when you went off there. So it's great. It's great to see you face to face.
I appreciate that. Thank you, sir.
In terms of Baker Mayfield, I was at that game last week in Cleveland. It's not been apparent that Baker Mayfield's been dealing with a lot here for several weeks. He injured that shoulder initially back in week 2. He, had that game in Minnesota, which I was also at in week 4, where he missed some throws, missed Odell Beckham Jr. down the sideline, a throw that could have put that game away. I dug into it last week when I was there and was told it wasn't really as if that shoulder was hampering him at the time. Like, yes, it's not ideal when you dislocate your shoulder, because as you know well, Braylon, once you do that once, it tears that labrum. It becomes susceptible to popping in and popping out. Can you play with it? Yes, which is what Baker was doing. But it was really only because of that awkward way that he went down last week that it popped it out again. He was in a ton of pain on the fields. That's something that he's been managing here. I know that wins are not a quarterback stat, but certainly the Browns have found ways to win a lot of games with Baker Mayfield as their quarterback. They are very much a team that is built to run the football, play really good defense, and then use the quarterback off of that. That's kind of the foundation of that offense that Kevin Stefanski runs, as well as the way they've invested in the offensive line, invested in the running backs. So then when all of a sudden both your starting tackles, really your top 3 tackles are all out. They're playing with their 4th and 5th tackles last week against a really good Arizona Cardinals pass rush. And then you don't have Nick Chubb on top of it, and then Kareem Hunt gets hurt. That's a big challenge. None of that's an excuse. I'm not saying that the best quarterback shouldn't be able to elevate above the level of what's around him. But, in terms of what you pay Baker Mayfield, what kind of commitment you make to him, that's going to be up to Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski and Jimmy Haslam and those guys moving forward. But what we have seen, what we know from the Browns, is that if Baker Mayfield and if that team plays well, they can win a lot of games with him as their quarterback.
Yeah, and to correct, that is Good Morning Football, not Get Up. That was a bomb on my part. My apologies.
I flip back and forth, too. It's easy to mess up. It's all good.
It's going back and forth. It's in the morning. You're just waking up. It's like one looks like the other. I do apologize. It's Good Morning Football.
Right. Hey, Tom, let me ask you just kind of a bigger picture question about moving on from a quarterback, whether it's a decision that the Browns are ultimately going to have to make with Baker Mayfield, whether it's if you go back to Arizona, moving on from Josh Rosen and selecting Kyler Murray again the next year, whether it's the situation with Tua in Miami. How difficult is it for those general managers, for those organizations to kind of get a do-over on that position?
Well, let's start with the fact that a lot of times when teams move on from former top 5 quarterbacks at the quarterback, it's a different regime that is doing it, because you don't have the number 1 pick or a top 5 pick very often if you're a good team. And so guys end up getting washed out. You go back to Baker Mayfield. He was drafted by John Dorsey in Cleveland, and Dorsey was very good as a personnel guy and did a lot of work that you still see being evident now with the way that the Browns team is built. But Andrew Berry is now the GM in charge. That's not to say that Andrew Berry lacks faith in any way in Baker Mayfield, but consider this, and we've seen this many times throughout the NFL. When you pay the quarterback, whether it is on a Patrick Mahomes type of deal, whether it's on an extension that is for substantially less money, it changes the economics of everything else that you do with the roster. And with quarterback contracts skyrocketing, and think about this, 8 years ago, Aaron Rodgers was the highest paid quarterback in the league, making $22 million a year. Now, when we're talking about these deals getting done, whether it's Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson coming up, this is $40 to $45 million. It has doubled in that span, and the cap has not doubled. So when you're paying the quarterbacks, Now they're eating up an even bigger chunk of your salary cap space, which means you have less flexibility to make other moves and plug different guys in that you might need at different positions. If you've got a really good one, it's a no-brainer to pay him. But you better be sure that that guy is the guy, or you end up in situations like the LA Rams did, where they paid Jared Goff early. They paid him after year 3. They did that because they knew the cap's going to go up, the market's going to expand, we can get a good deal now. But then when all of a sudden, based upon injuries and the relationship with the head coach and everything else that's going on as Goff now prepares to face his old team this week with the Lions, they ended up in a position where they had to find somebody to take his contract on in order to acquire a different quarterback because they were so far up against it on the cap. So these are really difficult decisions, some of the most difficult that you have to make. It's a no-brainer to pay a Josh Allen. It's a no-brainer to pay a Patrick Mahomes. Ultimately, it's probably going to be a no-brainer to pay a Lamar Jackson. There's going to be some school of thought, though, always that, all right, the longer you can wait to pay that guy, the more flexibility that you have. If you're not totally sold on the guy, well, you can just go draft another one and spend on other positions. But you better make sure that new guy is not worse than the old guy, or else you're going to be looking for a job too.
Yeah, you will.
Tom Pelissero, NFL Network, joins us here. Thursday Night Football tonight on the network, of course, and out on Fox. You got the Browns hosting the Broncos. Browns going with Case Keenum, who I would rather have here in Detroit than Jared Goff right now. Tommy, what happened to the guy that won 6 playoff games with the Rams?
It's a really good question, and Jared Goff certainly dealt with some injuries last season. There was also, everything everybody's been open about it, Sean McVay and Jared Goff, that they had a fraying of their relationship. The communication was not very good all the way down to the day that they made that trade and sent him to Detroit. We've seen Jared Goff win a lot of games. He's played banged up. He's been a part of a team that went to the Super Bowl. Sean McVay had a big part in that in terms of his offense was the perfect fit for what Goff did. But part of it, too, is you just have to look at kind of the circumstances around him. Toward the end of last season, again, for whatever reason, those two were not on the same page, to the point that Sean McVay started looking at John Wofford and saying, we may be better off playing that guy as we get closer to the postseason than we are Jared Goff. In terms of what's happening now in Detroit, they don't have an NFL offensive line right now based upon injuries. Frank Ragnow's out. Their left tackle has been out for quite some time. Their right tackle, the rookie Penei Sewell's had to move over to left. They've had other injuries, and they don't have NFL receivers on that roster because they bet on Brashad Perriman. That didn't work out. Tyrell Williams had a concussion. He's not come back. Quintez Cephas got injured. You're down to like your 4th and 5th receivers. You're not running the football particularly effectively because nobody really respects the passing game at this point. Again, not making any excuses for Jared Goff. There's a lot of different reasons that they're 0-6 right now. It's not all on Jared Goff. People read into what Dan Campbell said after the game the other day. They are not benching Jared Goff. Not right now, nor can they, because they still owe him not just the remainder of his fully guaranteed salary this year. They owe him another $26 million fully guaranteed in 2022.
And we have David Blau.
Yeah, David Blau's the backup.
Go Boilermakers.
That's another thing. Tom, give me a thought on Matt Stafford. What we're seeing him, his level of play right now at the Rams is, we've seen flashes here in Detroit, obviously, but the way he looks playing for the Rams is just next level.
Well, first off, don't disrespect David Blau, a guy who made that start on Thanksgiving. They couldn't even get his play sheet on his wrist taped down all the way. That thing's flapping all over. He's making some plays. He's shown he's a gamer. He can step in.
I said go Boilermakers.
Tim Boyle will be back at some point, too.
Yeah.
Another interesting guy if he ever gets a chance to be on the field. In terms of Matthew Stafford, Matthew Stafford is perpetually banged up. He's always got injuries. He already had one where he banged his hand or his thumb or whatever it was a couple of weeks ago. Continues to play through it. That's been him through the course of his career, which is he's willing to play hurt. He's not a vocal leader necessarily, but he is somebody that people gravitate towards, in part because he's willing to play hurt, because he'll go out there and give you his best effort regardless of what the circumstances are. What I always thought was interesting, and we talked a lot about this on Good Morning Football back through the course of the spring, was this is the first time that Matthew Stafford has really faced expectations since maybe 2009 when he was the number 1 pick coming out, because every other year he had the excuse, which was, it's the Lions. Look at everything else. Look at the organization. Look how long it's been. 1957. They haven't won anything since then. They got all these other things, bad GMs, bad personnel, whatever it is. Now all of a sudden he goes to the Rams where everything is dialed up. A Super Bowl team a few years ago, a really good coach in Sean McVay. They got superstars on the other side with Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey. Why shouldn't Stafford be able to go into the playoffs. And you can even make the argument that if the Rams don't go to the Super Bowl this year, their season's been a failure because of the way that they've gone all in. To Stafford's credit, he's played well to this course in the season, really only had one clunker of a game for that entire offense so far, and he should play that well based upon the personnel that he's got around him. I just think it's going to be really interesting when Stafford, who I know has been to the playoffs a few times but never won a playoff game, when it gets down to December, January, crunch time in the postseason, how does he fare? There's nothing I'm saying about the makeup that would suggest that he's not going to be able to deliver. He just hasn't had to do it before, and never before has it been about, if they don't win those big games, about Matthew Stafford. Every other point in his career, it's been about, well, Stafford played really well. It was everybody else.
If you're just joining the bottom line, we're with Tom Pelissero, NFL Network's own. Hey, Tom, one last question for you before we let you get out of here. And if we didn't ask this question, then we wouldn't be doing our jobs. What do you make of the situation going on between the Miami Dolphins and the Houston Texans? Does Miami pick up Deshaun Watson, and what will it take?
Well, here's what I would tell you, what we know. And this goes back to what we reported before the start of training camp in July. The Texans want a lot for Deshaun Watson, regardless of the things that are going on with him that have nothing to do with football, including 22 civil lawsuits alleging different forms of sexual misconduct, as well as a police investigation and an NFL investigation. The Texans want 3 first-round draft picks and more for Deshaun Watson. That has been the price all along. Deshaun Watson has a no-trade clause, which means he can veto a deal to anywhere that he doesn't want to go to. And Deshaun Watson wants to go to the Miami Dolphins. There have been many points at which it appeared, and based on what we were hearing over the past several months, this deal could get done quickly. But every time we get to that point, there seems to be a slowing down of what's going on. So what was reported yesterday was that a Deshaun Watson to Miami trade could get done this week. Could it? Yes. Could it get done next week? Yes. Could it have gotten done last week? Yes. There is no such thing as close in the NFL when it comes to trades. They either get done or they don't. To this point, the Deshaun Watson deal has not gotten done. It would not be a surprise if he ends up with the Miami Dolphins, whether that is sometime here in the next 12 days before the deadline, or it ends up even perhaps being after the season, which is a scenario that the Texans have accounted for. It would not be a surprise if he ends up in Miami because that's where he wants to go. He has some level of control over where he ends up, because if he gets traded someplace else, he can simply say, I'm not going, and blow up the entire trade. It's going to take that same level of compensation, 3 first-round draft picks and more. Are these two teams going to be able to align in the next 12 days, given the unknowns about Watson's availability, not just this season, because the NFL has not put him on the exempt list, and my understanding is that's not going to change simply because he gets traded, but eventually there could be discipline. You don't know exactly what that discipline is going to be. That could eventually come in 2022. There are still a lot of moving parts here, and at some point, the sides are going to have to decide, do we do this now, given the unknowns and the way that that impacts compensation, or do we wait? And that's been the lingering question for months. That remains the question right now, guys.
Tommy, just answer this question for Detroit, because we're all out of answers and we all grasp at straws here. How has it not worked in 60 years here? Because the NFL is set up for everybody to win. So we're the only non-expansion team to never make a Super Bowl. Our Super Bowl here is the draft, and we flunk on that every year as well. Just tell me.
Not every year, Tom. Just 3 out of every 6 years.
Exactly. About an 85%. Tom, what? I can't even put it in words. The Lions. Just why? Why?
I would say this. It's a bad sign that I know off the top of my head the last time that the Lions won a championship, because we've had to recite that stat in 1957 so many times. Listen, there's a lot of things that have gone on. There's obviously been a lot of different regimes. There have been very good players who have been historic parts of the franchise, going back to Barry Sanders, Calvin Johnson, of course, Matthew Stafford, and people older than me would remember people a lot further back than that over the years. I would say this for the current regime and for the Ford family trying to get the right people in place. They swung big. They had a very open mind about who they were going to bring in as their head coach and general manager in the last cycle. They brought back Chris Spielman, somebody who understands that city, understands the organization. And they brought in a head coach in Dan Campbell, who played for the Lions and understands specifically how hard it is, how challenging it is and the amount of negativity that comes with 60-plus years of losing. So I know they're 0-6 right now. That's obviously not wins on paper yet, but this was going to be a build. This was going to be something where they knew this was not going to instantaneously be a playoff team this year because they were so young on defense, and that was even before they started losing guys, Jeff Okudah among others, going down. They knew on offense they were going to be challenged at the wide receiver position. They thought the offensive line was going to be the strength of the team. All of a sudden, everybody ends up getting hurt. So I would say judge this Lions regime not based upon the 0-6 start and the fact that, quite frankly, they're punching above their weight every single week. Last week against the Bengals was not good, but every other game they are hanging in games that they have no business hanging in based upon the state of the roster right now. They've got to show growth on offense. Dan Campbell's made that clear. He's changed up some things. I know in practice in recent weeks. A couple weeks ago, he had the ones going against the ones on big plays in practice. That doesn't happen a whole lot in the regular season. They're trying to find different ways to challenge guys. A big thing coming into the year was try to have some early success, gain some confidence with that group. Again, that hasn't happened. They've had a couple of near misses that, frankly, in one instance, reduced their head coach to tears. But this is going to be a process here. They've got a guy in Brad Holmes as the general manager who is on the college scouting side with the Rams. That's going to be his bread and butter. He really only had one draft so far. He's got a lot more capital coming now in the 2022 draft. Give it some time. Know that they want to invest in developing that toughness within the program, getting the right types of people in place. They're just starting to lay those bricks right now. So let's have this conversation again a year or two down the road and see where we're at here. This was never going to be a quick fix. So everybody stay calm. Everyone stay calm for now in Detroit. This is going to be a process, but they believe that they've got the right people in place to take the right direction.
Rebuilding since 57.
There you go. Tom Pelissero, check him out.
This is a real rebuild, though. You want the real rebuild. This is it right here. This is the real rebuild.
Your lips to God's ears, my friend. Tom Pelissero, NFL Network. Check him out there.
You, buddy.
Also on Twitter at Tom Pelissero. And thanks to
Glad
this
those
man,
16 touchdowns
2007 fantasy football champion, Tom Pelissero. Thanks so much, my friend.
Thanks, fellas.
All right,
Appreciate you,
bet.
buddy.
We appreciate your time.